Today we have with us Maxime Cerutti, Director of Business Europe's Social Affairs. Maxime, welcome. Responsible for a diverse portfolio of social affairs and labour market policy issues, and for Business Europe's engagement as social partner in the context of the European social dialogue. We also have with us Claude Denagtergal, advisor at the European Trade Union Confederation for over 25 years, who works on economic and social cohesion, structural funds, financial perspectives, free movement of persons, interregional trade unions, councils, and EURES. Claude, welcome. We have with us Liliane Volozinskis, Director of Social Affairs and Training Policy at SMEUnited, the European Employers Organization representing crafts and SMEs. Her responsibilities include employment, social affairs, industrial relations, with a particular focus on social dialogue, including education and vocational training policies. Liliane, welcome. Guillaume Afellat, in charge of social affairs as SGI Europe's General Secretariat since 2014. His work focuses on social protection, health and safety at work, the European semester and macroeconomics, education and gender equality and social dialogue at cross-industry level. Guillaume, welcome. And finally, we also have with us Johannes Kopf, chair of the PES Network, whom we met yesterday. Thank you, Johannes, for being with us today also.
Good morning.
Good morning to everybody. Eamon, over to you for an interesting conversation with our panelists.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. I'd like to start by perhaps asking Johannes a question. When we look at the role of social partnership and social partners across the European Union, their role in relation to PES seems to vary quite considerably from country to country. Have you any observations, Johannes, on why that may be the case?
Thank you, Damon. Indeed, the involvement of the social partners varies from country to country. There are many examples where PES, like in Austria, are governed by tripartite bodies with equal representation of trade unions, employer organization, and government. In these cases, the social partners are involved in the management or in the supervision mostly by law. It's the case, as I said, in Austria, the PES I'm responsible for. In other countries, the involvement of the social partners is rather based on agreements or traditional, I would say, mostly old agreements. But also there, often social partners play an important role, but they are not directly involved in the steering. They act more as advisors to the PES, important advisors, I'd say. For instance, in designing new active labor market measures. When looking all over Europe and all our member organizations, I would say in two-thirds of them, social partners play an important role. And I think it is that it might be that there are many organizations in one national context, for example, for specific branches, which can make cooperation complex. So I would say the form of organization of the social partner itself also plays an important role for the way we cooperate with social partners. In Austria, to give you again the same example, one big trade union organization that's of course much more easier to cooperate with, them. But what we know, the benchmarking and bench learning project, it's clear that when we assess the degree of partnership with regard to the PES development and so, it's clear that the PES judge cooperation with social partners very positive. From my own experience, I would say it's beneficial for the success of the PES in many cases. I myself started my career in a social partner organization. I came from the Federation of Austrian Industry, And I would say the advantage is obvious. Social partners are very close to their members, so they can help us in the past to develop the right measures, and they can express the views to the member needs. So yeah, it was very important when now implementing crisis measures such as the short-term work system, and the social partners, played a very important role in our policies.
Thank you very much, Johannes. So clearly, irrespective of the different institutional structures across Europe, social partnership is a very important, if not vital, component of PES work, particularly now as we've been dealing with unprecedented challenges during the last year from COVID. So I'd like to really move on to perhaps some consideration of the post-COVID recovery, and hopefully we will be in a post-COVID era sooner rather than later. And I'd like to ask Claude, and then perhaps if Maxime could follow up as well, what would you both think are the particular challenges and priorities that we need to consider in terms of increasing the employability of citizens to enable them to take advantage of labour market opportunities post-COVID? So perhaps first, Claude, would you have any perspectives on that issue, please?
Yes, good morning, everybody, and thanks a lot for the invitation and also the introductory words of Johannes Kopf, underlying the importance of the social partners and the importance of the partnership, generally speaking, and before the crisis, but even more today and even more tomorrow, in order to give an answer and to tackle all the challenges we have to face. So I will be brief because time is running on and we have some rules to respect concerning the timing, but in some words, I would like to give the priorities also of ETUC and what we consider as the role and the commitments and what EU member states and in particular public employment services should do. So we consider EU member states should adapt their employment policies to make them more efficient and targeted to cope with the employment challenges brought by the COVID-19 crisis. The pandemic is a common challenge, and therefore there is a need for the EU to take a more ambitious approach in supporting and coordinating national policies aimed at protecting workers and labor markets. There are some decisions taken, but we also consider that public employment services should be strengthened so as to contribute to the integration of the most vulnerable groups of society in the labor market. Schemes for upskilling and reskilling should be established, and social partners should be involved in the design and monitoring of these policies. External flexibility approaches in the current crisis will only put non-standard workers in a vulnerable situation, However, internal flexibility schemes like the promotion of sound telework and flexible work arrangement can be an effective manner to protect employment and boost economic activity. Reskilling and upskilling, and I want to underline that because PES have a key roles in that. Reskilling and upskilling will be a key component for the labor market to adapt during the COVID-19 crisis, but also to make sure that Europe emerges from this crisis stronger and more competitive. Member states should build up or strengthen job transition support mechanisms and systems with support from the European Social Fund and European Structural and Investment Funds. Such systems can create ways to get back to employment, preventing redundancies, leading to prolonged unemployment, but also opening pathways to new jobs and various processes of job creation. In matters of support for the unemployed, where PES have a key role, the coverage and level of unemployment benefits need to be sufficient, and they should be above the poverty level. Some national systems are too rigid when it comes to eligibility, and the reimbursement is too low. At the same time, unemployment benefits should be linked in an effective way to active labor market policies. And a relevant issue is how short-time work schemes will be combined with activation measures for its recipients. It's important not to wean off the income support too soon, but at the same time, it is clear that many jobs have disappeared or will disappear by the time containment measures are released. It is therefore appropriate to provide active labor market policy support for those that will have to move on to enable them to get good jobs and quality jobs. In the past, such activation policies could end up forcing workers into precarious jobs without prospect, especially in countries like Ireland. This should be avoided this time to prevent Europe from repeating the mistakes of the response to the crisis of 2008. And just to make a reference to what has just been presented in the beginning and the result in the pandemic has made the situation for migrant workers even more fragile on the employment front. Migrants must be guaranteed fair and decent conditions to access employment, thereby avoiding discrimination. It is also necessary to promote greater mobility between member states for those who already have a permit, and to take steps to regularize migrant workers by ensuring that they have regular jobs with health and social security coverage. And there, the US network has a key role to play, excuse me. But I will finish with an example of what we are doing as social partners. So whereas the economic activity shrank significantly in 2020, employment in the euro area fell only slightly due to the role played by job retention schemes, excuse me, such as short-time work schemes. And almost in all European countries, trade unions are negotiating short-time work schemes with both employers and governments, so that workers are not let go during the COVID-19 lockdown, but instead continue to receive their wages or a percentage of their wages. And I invite the colleagues from the employers' organization maybe to go more in depth in this very important agreement that we are step by step negotiating and agree with together between social partners. Thanks a lot for your attention. There is a much lot to say, but time is limited, as you told us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Claude. So before I hand over to Maxime, there's a lot there about a call for ambition, a call for strengthening public employment services, a need to be particularly mindful of the needs of the most vulnerable workers, investment in active labour market policies, and maybe some of the flexibilities that have been employed during the COVID pandemic crisis period, seeing whether they can continue into the future. So I'd like to hand the floor over to Maxime. So Maxime, from a Business Europe perspective, what would your observations be on the challenges and priorities for our policy interventions to promote employability post-COVID?
Good morning to all of you, and a particular thanks to Johannes for the invitation to take part in this conference today. Imon and Patricia, thanks for moderating our discussion this morning in the panel. Well, I think we are at a very important time, and your conference is timely. You have it every year, but this year in particular, the role of public employment services is very important due to the situation we are in. So I support what Claude said, that there is an important role in strengthening but it's also about reforming. So I would add this word as well, reforming the public employment services where needed to make them more operational, more performing is a very important agenda forward. Johannes already emphasized the bench learning that is taking place in the network. We very much support the policy approach, but also all the information this contributes to the European policy debates based on the actual perspectives and practices of different PES across Europe. And I think today and yesterday, tomorrow, your focus is on partnerships. And of course, this relates to the fact that in this crisis, what we see, and very importantly, we need to get right the way to organize the role of different actors, keeping in mind that one key objective is to have as many people as possible in employment. And another very important objective is to upskill and reskill the workforce and to attract more people into employment. So these two are very important challenges. These are the core challenges on labor markets across Europe. They may have different ways of materializing in different countries, but I think this crisis, the COVID crisis, makes it a very important and priority action for all the member states at this time. So working on this together in a partnership needs to, of course, take a look first at how we organize the cooperation between the public employment services and the social partners. And I think on this, Johannes, as chair, I can feel and I can see in your approach, you also invited us in June to a meeting with the board of the PES network. I can see that your leadership is basically very much engaging in trying to improve the cooperation with the social partners, and that is very appreciated. So we want to work with you. And of course, I know as well that the Commission on its own is also engaging with EASE, the Commission recommendation that was part of the action plan on the implementation of the pillar. And this is something that is a welcomed initiative. I think it goes in this direction I was saying, to try to have an improved active labor market policy framework. And where I would put a nuance with Claude is that we need to move out from the short-time working schemes. They have been very effective during the crisis. We were supporting of them, and the European SURE initiative was part of the approach. But now we are in the recovery mood. Slowly but surely, we hope that vaccination will help us moving out of this period where people have had to work in a different way, and that we are able to really recover from this crisis, and that we can do it quickly. And doing it quickly means that we need to understand the kind of support that is needed today, and to focus our resources and energies where this is mostly needed. And I think in this, we need to have the short-term challenges of COVID in mind. That is clear. But we also need to have the longer-term structural challenges in our minds as we progress. And I'll try to explain this when looking into a number of key issues that I would like to bring to your discussions. But before going into the key issues, just one last word on the overall framework. I think we're speaking about employment, skills, and social inclusion at the same time. For what relates to employment and skills, the social partners play a key role. And on skills training in particular for the employees, we are in the lead. So this is very important that whatever comes out of the work of public employment services in the context of ease, with a focus that is necessary on better skilling and upskilling the people that are inactive in our societies and the unemployed people. We could see in the skills debates at European level that these groups are really under participating in terms of skills training. And that is very important to achieve better results. We have in parallel a demographic aging issue that is looked at in a green paper at the moment. And in that context, of course, we cannot afford not to have a stronger employment participation of our society. The demographic evolution makes it a strong necessity on all of us to have more people coming to our labor markets. Otherwise, we will have difficulties sustaining our social protection systems. So now, having said all this, I'd like to highlight a number of practices and key issues. In terms of practices, the French practice Transco is a very good one that we find interesting to look into. It is an initiative that really helps the companies and the workers identifying some jobs that may be in danger due to the crisis and trying to, in a partnership way, organize the support that is needed to the companies and to the workers that are concerned so that there would be a mobility possibility and a new job that would be accessible for the workers in question. Similarly, we think that the cooperation between public employment services and private employment services need to improve. There can be very good ways of organizing bridges between these people that are in jobs that may be in danger and in the sectors where there is a strong need in this crisis to organize mobility through the cooperation between public and private employment services. So we really encourage you to look into this, and some countries have shown the way. So it's important to learn from these countries. Then there are another practice that I would like to highlight, which is a Swedish case. I think the Swedish example has been for a number of years, one where the public employment service was not really performing well. And now there is a strong engagement of the government and the social partners to improve it. There is a structural reform that is at play. And I think this payment to results approach is very interesting. And this probably is also something that could have a learning function through the bench learning that is done in the network. I mean, now looking at two particular practices that are very important. One is the employers' cooperation between public employment services and employers. There is a need for more and better. And how to do it is basically to have the policy frameworks and the support from public employment services that encourage employers to hire more workers. It goes with the upskilling and the bringing the inactive and unemployed people to our labor markets. But there is a need for a proactive approach by the public employment services to better serve the needs of employers. And of course, it has to do with the labor costs. You need to have financial incentives as well, and they need to be well designed. There is also the in-work benefits. I mean, how to encourage people to be active in the labor market rather than staying passive and receiving benefits. That is a key issue, and in-work benefits may have an important role to play in this respect. So we encourage this to be looked at in the bench learning. And one last point is around how to improve structurally. I think we are now in a period where we know that data management and the data intelligence is critical. Your public employment services nationally have invested in digital solutions already for a number of your countries, perhaps not everywhere. Now it's really a time to look into the digital solution that can make it more performing, the way you work, and that you better serve the needs of your clients. We really think that this has a lot of potential ahead, and I would also like to make the link with some other work done by CEDEFOP in this respect when it comes to skills. CEDEFOP does a lot of labor market intelligence, and it is inspirational as well for the Public Employment Services Network. Thanks a lot for your attention, and looking forward to the debate.
So we had, again, from Maxime, a common view shared with Claude in terms of the need for activation measures, perhaps some slightly different perspectives on the continuing mandate for wide use of short-time working schemes, and indeed an endorsement of bench learning, which I think all PES colleagues would find to be very positive. Again, the PES network mandate is all about meeting customer needs and providing quality services to both employers and job seekers, and clearly about ensuring labour market integration to facilitate and foster social inclusion. And indeed, there is lots of very good work going on in many public employment services to try and see what further benefits can be arrived at through more extensive use of data mining and use of artificial intelligence. So lots of interesting developments at the moment. I'd like now actually to move on to asking a follow-up question first to Liliane and then to Guillaume actually. And what I'd really like to ask them is what they think their members particularly could be doing collectively, or what more their members could be doing collectively to deal with the current crisis, and perhaps now the period where we're hopefully emerging from the crisis. So first, Liliane, from an SMEUnited perspective, do you think there's more that your members could be doing to deal with the current crisis? Or perhaps you'd like also to comment on the things they've been doing so far.
Good morning to everyone, and thank you, Johannes, and everybody for this invitation to the conference, really this PES Network Conference. I mean, SMEs and particularly self-employed have been hard hit by the crisis, and this is a reality. And therefore, our members, craft and SME organizations, have been extremely proactive during the crisis, and since the crisis is not over, they need to continue. I very much support what I heard from Claude and Maxime, because we are really on the same line about really fostering the partnership, going further with more services, particularly for SMEs. And this has been really one of the incredible issues during the crisis, the new services to self-employed. And if I take a bit all the actions we have seen during the crisis and are still on, for example, what we have seen within the partnership between SME organizations and PES is about the training for people in temporary unemployment, which should continue when we are talking about job-to-job transition and upskilling, reskilling. And in particular, our main aim is to avoid really to a further increase of unemployment, and even more important, to avoid long-term unemployment, which means really having active measures for people coming back to the labor market as soon as possible in the same job or in another job. When we're talking about our members, what they have done a lot, for example, campaigns to recruit people in other service or other areas, services where there were missing people, shortage of labor force, such as care or agriculture. There have been even tripartite agreements between social partners and the governments. There was also huge advocacy from SME organizations to pay more attention to the situation of self-employed. I mentioned it already, but I think this is something we should keep in mind. Targeted information to SMEs, in particular, to explain to them the services of the PES and link to that the short-time working schemes, which were really one of the key elements to keep companies alive, and also to have workers ready to come back when the recovery is there. We had also the participation to the design of short-time working schemes. I fully agree with both, I mean, with Maxime and also Claude. Short-time working schemes should remain as long as necessary. Of course, gradually it should disappear as soon as the recovery is there, but we see that the crisis is not at the end now. So we need to be extremely careful to cut this type of systems too early. And also, when we were discussing about short-time working schemes, our members were complaining a lot about the bureaucracy, the non-adaptation, the non-flexibility of these schemes, and it has been either adapted to the reality of small businesses or even created in some member states where it did not exist. I would tend to say for the near future, what we need is really to invest much more on up and reskilling. And there we have two main issues: labor market intelligence and skills intelligence, which really should be highly improved, working closely in partnership with public employment services, as well as private employment services, but also, I would tend to say, national, regional services for labor market and skill intelligence. As it was said by Maxime, when we are talking about upskilling, reskilling, employers are really in the lead, but nevertheless, SMEs and smaller companies might have difficulties as well. They should be supported. When we are talking also about the possibilities for recovery, there is a huge issue of entrepreneurship. This has been really one of the key issues when we are talking about new job creation or recreation of job. And there is a key role for the PES to support entrepreneurship, mentoring, tutoring, and also financially to support that. What I really see as a key issue, and you have it in the next workshops, the services dedicated to SMEs, because they really, and particularly when we are talking SMEs, it's not an homogeneous group. You have rather larger SMEs, but I'm talking about micro and small businesses which need much more support, and they need dedicated services to them. We were talking about clients. Don't forget employers, particularly micro and small businesses, belong to these clients because they need to better define their skills needs. They need to better define also the job profiles they are looking for. And there I really see a future cooperation together with this organization, quite an SME organization, and the public employment services. In order to conclude, I would like to say we should really, PES will have a huge role to play according to the EE's recommendation, the Commission recommendation on the job-to-job transitions, but also everything around entrepreneurship, also supporting more apprenticeship and also traineeship, because there is a huge issue for young people to come back or to enter the labor market. So I will tend to say there is a lot to do more together, and this is why the bench learning is really an extremely useful method for progress. If I may, I would like to also mention one good practice. For example, in Germany, what is called Arbeitgeber Services, which is a setup of the so-called employer services at local level. I very much insist, I mean, working at national level is a key issue, but it should be much more relevant at regional and local level in order to get more information on qualification, on vocational education and training support measures, but also to facilitate the employment of more vulnerable groups. And last but not least, I'm really joining Claude, also of migrant workers, because they are on the labor market and they should be better really included in our labor market. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liliane. So again, we've got a strong endorsement for bench learning in public employment services. Again, a reference to the partnerships between public and private employment services, of course, a very important aspect of partnership working. And indeed, I think Liliane made the very good point that we often discuss SMEs, who are perhaps the largest source of vacancies across Europe, but the term SME is a very broad one, and it does cover a very large swathe of different sorts of organisations. And indeed, our workshops later on this morning are very helpfully looking at issues of both entrepreneurship and support for SMEs generally. Guillaume, from your perspective, perhaps thinking of SGI's members, could you perhaps give us your perspective on how you think your members can best deal collectively with the current crisis?
So thank you very much for giving me the floor. So of course, I'm extremely happy to be with you today. I believe this conference is indeed, as Maxime mentioned, extremely timely, considering the many layered challenges that we have to face, and public employment services are really first in line. Same as my members in reality, and let me take this moment to take a bit about our two hats in this. Of course, we are employers, and I share many of the points put forward by my colleague Maxime and Liliane in particular, and also by Claude, by the way, on labor market participation, the need for reskilling and upskilling, and in particular to take into account territorial dimension and possible fragmentation between territories and regions we have in Europe. As for my second hat, so services of general interest, which is really European language, but what it is public services that you know very much from the PES perspective, which is housing, for instance, social housing. It is about transport. It's about also education, healthcare, but also the care sector. So services that are considered enabling services that play a key role, especially in the crisis that we are facing, to make sure vulnerable people are maintain a connection with the labor market and with civil and with society in general. So that is one of our priority today when we consider the possible cooperation between PES and the members that we have in SGIs. It's about how we can move forward even better toward an integrated offer of enabling services that take into consideration all these barriers that happen when we want to integrate vulnerable people in the labor market. So I mentioned indeed, housing costs, for instance, can be a big barrier in order to be able to get a job and to be able to fully participate to these jobs in the future. So this is something that we take from the perspective of investment. Of course, Claude has mentioned it quite well. Investment, that is the same necessity that we have for PES as for services of general interest in general. And this is an investment that has to focus on territorial and local realities. That is very important. In general, I want to fully support what my colleagues have mentioned on the labor market intelligence and skills intelligence. It's a challenge for all of us. We want to take into account the big transformation that happened because of the greening of the economy, because of digitalization, of course, but also indeed because of demographic aging. And we see that for this, jobs are changing. Social partners are indeed the key in a position to understand these changes and to take into account, the necessary adaptation to education and training system, especially where they have the major role in terms of how they can better develop the offer of training. But of course, there you need a good cooperation with local government, with the best, who are the best in place for the matching element, and proper channels of communication, of course, between the result of social dialogue and these discussions and the functioning of PES and the adaptation of the offer that can happen on the ground. I want to support, we look a lot at the mobility between sectors as well, from sectors that are facing deep transformation and jobs that are doomed to disappear in some places because of the greening, for instance, and how social partners can connect from sector to sector and create key career paths between the two. We think it's a key objective that we have. We know that digitalization has a lot of possible new opportunities that are very different from one another, from jobs in data, for instance, to very technical informatic language jobs, to other forms of communication experts. So all these diversity, there need to be proper barriers between sectors. And for this, training offers need to be fully developed and need to be properly discussed between social partners. A few general comments to finish. Of course, on short-term working schemes, I have a position that is very similar to the one Liliane expressed, to maintain them for as long as necessary, because we are still facing massive uncertainties on the labor market, connection to the vaccine, how it's going to be rolled out at the national level, but also linked to the impact in the labor market. And we know that this crisis, the COVID crisis, had an impact that was multiplied on the vulnerable people. This is something that is maintained, and we need to maintain close cooperation between the stakeholders that are the key topic of the partnership today in order to focus our attention on these people, because their barriers have become increasingly more difficult to breach. And I really welcome that the PES really started their important mutual learning activities also on the youth guarantee, for instance. This will be a very important key topic for the years to come. I won't be too long to keep some time for the questions, but thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Guillaume. And again, some very interesting observations about the continuing importance of partnership working with local actors, municipalities as well, and particularly some very interesting observations again about how long perhaps we should be continuing with the short-time work schemes, which have been obviously very successful so far. So perhaps what I think I would like to do now is ask our panelists if they could just perhaps briefly give us a couple of sentences on the question, our most popular question, of how has the role of social dialogue changed since COVID, if indeed it has. So perhaps could I ask Johannes first to offer us a couple of perspectives on that particular question? Has the role of social dialogue changed since COVID, and if so, how?
Yes, Eamon. Of course, especially the short-time work system was a point where social partners' negotiation capability and also know-how was needed in many countries. So they played a crucial role in building up such systems, and not on the other hand just building up, but also transferring it for the special need of the crisis. And then in all member states, we tried to have also upskilling during the crisis. So it was a point of getting the know-how from employers out of the companies to know which skills are needed for the post-COVID time, so to say, where it's the upskilling of the workforce will play a crucial role. I mean, it's one of the basic rules. You should train unemployed during the crisis to have qualified workers afterwards. I would say, yeah, they became more important social partners at all. We have really a big, I would say, revival. We had a big revival in Austria, for instance, but also the close cooperation with the Public Employment Service was crucial to the success.
Okay, thank you very much. Perhaps if I could now ask Claude, if you had a couple of observations on the changing role of social partnership during the crisis.
Yes, thank you. And I would like to make also a difference, as Maxime mentioned during this intervention, is we have to make also a difference between the role and specific and priority role of social partners when we refer to employment and skilling and reskilling issues, and the role of social partners, of course, together with other stakeholders when we refer to social inclusion. So this being said, when we refer to social dialogue, it's only between social partners at European level, at national level, local level. And as I said in the beginning, well, given the crisis, if this is a positive point, social dialogue has improved at national level and local and regional level in order to find a solution, in order to tackle the challenges of the COVID-19 crisis, and mostly when it refers to short-term work schemes. And I insist on the fact that it is highly important, of course, to look for solution, for long-term solution, but I don't share the rapidity that Maxime puts forward. And well, I'm very happy that Liliane and Guillaume support more the fact that we have to consider that today and tomorrow, the challenges are the same. And unfortunately, we will need more time and also investment, and big investment for the coming years. And I don't know if you know, but for the moment, nobody knows when this crisis will finish. And also what we know is what are the challenges, what are the consequences, the dramatic consequences for workers, for self-employed, for enterprises. So it's highly important to strengthen even more the role of social dialogue and the social dialogue at the different level, and insisting also at the European level. And I have to say also, as my colleagues said from employer organization, that we have made steps forward also at European level, because this is also a necessity, an obligation.
Okay, Maxime, sorry, so it's, apologies, Claude, to cut across you there, but we've only got a couple of minutes left, so yeah, very sorry for interrupting. Thank you. But I think perhaps if I could bring in Maxime for a couple of observations on the changing role of social partnership during the crisis. Thank you, Maxime. Of course. Thank you.
And we can go over time for a few minutes, just
yeah, okay, indeed. Okay, thank you, Maxime. Yes.
Good. So yeah, I have a few observations. I will cover quickly the role of social partners, but I would also like to comment on some of the other questions. On the role of social partners, I think we are very much in line with what Claude was just saying now. So we've seen in this crisis that the social partners played a key role to provide innovative solutions to the new problems that arose with the COVID-19 crisis. And that is welcome news. We need to, of course, continue on that wave and try to make sure that we structurally will take some good approaches for strengthening the social dialogue. Capacity building of social partners is very important in some countries where the structures are quite weak. That's a point I wanted to add. When it comes to short-time work schemes and the structural approach to active labor market policies, you heard the nuances between us social partners, but in effect, we are all in agreement. We need to continue as long as this is needed. But at the same time, and that's what I was trying to instill into our discussions here, we need to be forward-looking and we need to look at the next step already. And this is recovery. And this is where we are going to be able to organize our labor markets as well as possible in the after-crisis period. That's what I wanted to emphasize. And two last points on my side. One is relating to one of the questions that relates to inactive people. So don't misunderstand me. There is no stereotyping in what I said about the need to focus on activating the inactive. Of course, this is a broad group of people. There are quite high levels of inactivity in our societies. Some countries have been good at increasing the employment participation of the inactive. And I think it should also be part of the bench learning to learn from these countries, how did they manage it? And of course, it is not about misunderstanding the fact that there are a lot of different personal, individual situations. Some people may not be able to work, and this is understood. So it's not about having everybody at work. And of course, we need to support people that need it. But on the other hand, there is a big group as well in this category of inactive that could work. And these people, they need support. They need to have more self-confidence, more structure, and be able to work in the future because our societies need them. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And perhaps if I could now bring in Liliane, perhaps if you would be able to offer a couple of observations about the changing role of social partnership working and social dialogue during the COVID pandemic. Thank you, Liliane.
Thank you. Yes, a few words about it. I fully support what I heard from Maxime and Claude on the fact that social partners have been extremely proactive and need to continue, innovative as well. What I would like to add is really on SMEs. Maxime mentioned capacity building. It should really be there everywhere at all levels, particularly for SME organizations. My second point is about the level of social dialogue. It's not enough to have a good social dialogue at national level. It should be as well sectoral and territorial level, because when we are talking about social dialogue, is really at all levels, including also for larger businesses at company level. And my third point is about inactive. I wanted really to follow what Maxime said. Currently, we have 17% of inactive people due to the crisis. I think we cannot allow to continue like that. It's absolutely crucial that these people are coming back to the labor market and will have the right support, because small businesses are all the time complaining about the lack of workforce, and on top of that, about the lack of skilled workforce. Therefore, combining both upskilling, reskilling, and activating inactive are for me the key priorities for the near future.
Thank you very much indeed. And clearly, I think there's a view that as we emerge from the COVID crisis, there will be still lots and lots of jobs, but they may well require different skills and a different fit than we had previously. So a need to be investing in allowing people to take advantage of the opportunities. Guillaume, would you be able to offer your perspective, perhaps finally, on how you think social dialogue and the social partnership role has changed perhaps during the COVID pandemic?
Absolutely, there is a strong understanding between our organizations. This crisis, I think, was very different from the previous one in terms of how social partners all over Europe came into action. Short-term work scheme is indeed our best example to that. We are seeing how widespread the use of these were and how crucial the role of social partners was. But I want to insist, as my colleagues have mentioned, but that situation is still not ideal in every country for social dialogue. And their capacity to action is conditioned by the strength of the structures. And I really want to support what Liliane mentioned on the levels. It's critical to take them into consideration. I would insist on the sectoral social dialogue level. That will be the crucial level where we can anticipate the skills needs for the future, taking into account the macro transformation linked to greening, linked to digital, linked to demographic aging. So this is where we need support from the member states and strong cooperation. The sectoral social dialogue needs to be developed in all countries. That is crucial. Of course, supported by a very strong cross-sectoral social dialogue. So for a quick comment, this is what I wanted to insist on. Thank you very much.
Okay, so lots of different perspectives, and that's what social dialogue and social partnership is all about. But perhaps I've got one final question, is unfortunately we are rather running out of time now, but I'd perhaps like to finish with a question for Johannes, if I may. Sometimes I think, Johannes, the language we use to describe our work and indeed our clients can infer certain things and perhaps have some unintended consequences. We often talk about inactive people or vulnerable people, but do you think perhaps the use of the term inactive can be one that maybe inadvertently, possibly, I'm sure, reinforces stigma and stereotypes? Should we come up with a different word rather than inactive to describe some of our PES customers?
Eamon, and what word are you thinking of?
Inactive. Rather than inactive, you're putting a question back to me now. That's interesting. Indeed. Well, we could perhaps talk about degrees of people's job search, perhaps more or less active in the labour market rather than inactive, or I don't know, people less frequently looking for work. What would you say? Can you think of a better adjective there? Yeah.
Sometimes we use out of labour force and are meaning out of paid labour. This is maybe more respective for unpaid against unpaid work. But I mean, we are the public employment services, and we are always talking about unemployment figures, meaning people searching for a job and being out of paid work, of course.
So people out of paid work?
Sure.
Okay,
I'm not sure which word is better to use. The problem when changing terms, and also the problem when changing statistics and such things, is that you can't compare it anymore. That's why I always try not to change too much, because it's always said, well, then it's not comparable yet, and then you don't see the long-term trend. It's the same with the European unemployment figures. Of course, they are too low, because just working for 1 hour a week paid, you are not employed normally. But it doesn't matter. We need the figures to show the differences in time and the differences between the states. So in fact, I wouldn't say we should change the definition. Although, we are criticized often for that statistics.
If you allow me, could I have a last word?
Indeed, yes, one last word, yes.
Well, I just wanted to have a message this time, not to Johannes as chair of PES Network, but to the Commission. I think we have in this debate demonstrated that there is a strong need for stronger cooperation between PES Network and all the employment policy actors, including the Commission and the social partners. And I just wanted to remind, we made the proposal as Business Europe to create an advisory committee on employment. We have one well-functioning advisory committee on vocational training, and we think another one on employment, but also another one on social protection is needed. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I think we're all agreed that public employment services and their vital work are one of the best real-time ways of taking the temperature of what's going on in the labour market, which of course was one of the reasons why public employment services were first established perhaps nearly 100 years ago. And I think Johannes made a very good point that when we change language, we do change the way we review statistics, and it can get quite complicated, but perhaps that's an interesting issue to address at some stage in the future. Thank you very much for your very, very interesting and helpful comments. It's unfortunate we run out of time in an hour so quickly in these discussions, but I'll hand back to Patricia now. Thank you very much.